The Galactic Confederacy had ruled the stars for 3,000 years. They had mapped every corner of the known universe, visited every planet worth visiting, and made contact with over 200 different species. The Confederacy was proud of what they had built. They believed they knew everything there was to know about the galaxy, but there was one place they never went. One small cluster of stars at the very edge of the galactic map, so far from everything else that most species forgot it existed. The old star charts marked this region with a simple warning that had been there for 8,000 years. The warning said only 2 words: "Do not enter." Nobody remembered why. The warning was older than the Confederacy itself, older than any civilization currently alive. Some scholars believed it was a mistake, an error from ancient times when species were still learning to travel between stars. Others thought it was superstition, the fear of primitive minds who did not understand the universe. But the warning remained, and for 8,000 years, no ship had crossed that invisible line. Until now. Ambassador Kethril, of the Vorthani Empire, stood in the center of the Grand Council chamber, his green scales shining under the bright lights. He was angry, and he did not try to hide it. The Vorthani were a proud species, warriors and conquerors, who had built their empire through strength and determination. They did not like being told where they could not go. "We have lost 17 ships," Kethril said, his voice echoing through the massive chamber. 17 vessels sent to scout the Edge territories, and all of them have vanished. No distress signals. No wreckage. Nothing. They simply disappeared. High Arbiter Melancel listened from her elevated seat. She was ancient even by the standards of her crystalline species, her body glowing with soft inner light. She had served on the council for over 400 years, and she had heard many complaints. But this one troubled her. "The quarantine exists for a reason," she replied calmly. "Our ancestors placed those warnings for our protection." "Our ancestors were fools," Kethril snapped. "They were afraid of shadows and stories. Whatever danger once existed in that region must have died out thousands of years ago. We need those shipping lanes. We need access to those resources. The Confederacy cannot expand if we are afraid of empty space." The debate continued for hours, as debates in the council always did. Different species had different opinions. Some supported Kethril and his desire to explore the forbidden region. Others urged caution. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one. They would send one more ship, a research vessel with the best sensors and the fastest engines. If this ship also disappeared, they would discuss the matter further. The research vessel was called the Eternal Seeker, and its captain was a Vorthane named Orldin. He was older than Kethril, more experienced, and far less confident about this mission. As his ship approached the quarantine boundary, felt a strange unease growing in his chest. Navigator Talveen sat at her station, watching the sensor displays with growing confusion. They had crossed the boundary 6 hours ago, and nothing made sense anymore. Signals bounced back in patterns she had never seen before. Stars appeared on her screens where her charts showed empty space. Something was very wrong. "Captain," she said quietly, not wanting to alarm the rest of the crew, "I am detecting something strange." Orldin moved to stand behind her, his multiple eyes studying the display. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. The shapes on the screen looked like sensor errors, glitches in the equipment. But as the Eternal Seeker moved deeper into the forbidden zone, the shapes became clearer. They were structures. Artificial structures. Thousands of them. Massive space stations orbited around planets that should have been lifeless. Ships of strange and unfamiliar design moved in perfect formations, more ships than Orldin had ever seen in one place. And at the center of it all, glowing like a jewel against the darkness of space, was a single blue and green world that pulsed with energy signatures unlike anything in the Confederacy's records. "That is impossible," Talveen whispered. "There is no civilization here. There cannot be a civilization here. We would have known." But there was. Someone had been living at the edge of the galaxy for a very long time, hidden from the rest of the universe, watching and waiting. And now, for the first time in 8,000 years, they had visitors. On the bridge of Station Omega-7, Commander Daniel Hayes watched the alien vessel on his tactical display. He was a tall man with gray eyes and a calm face that rarely showed emotion. He had been stationed at the edge of human space for 15 years, and in all that time, nothing interesting had ever happened. Now, something very interesting was happening, and he was not sure how to feel about it. Admiral Patricia Cole stood beside him, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was 73 years old, but she looked much younger. Human medical technology had advanced far beyond what the rest of the galaxy could imagine. She had commanded fleets, fought in wars that no other species knew about, and made decisions that had shaped the course of history. This decision might be the most important of all. "They crossed the boundary 12 hours ago," she said, her voice flat and professional. "Our drones have been tracking them since they entered the zone." "Do we know who they are?" Daniel asked. "Vorsani, based on the ship design. Reptilian species, aggressive, always looking for new territory to conquer. They have been pushing against the quarantine for a long time." Daniel nodded slowly. Humanity had been watching the galaxy for 8,000 years. They had learned patience. They had learned to wait and observe while other species rushed forward without thinking. It was this patience that had kept them alive when so many others had fallen. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Patricia was silent for a long moment. The weight of 8,000 years pressed down on her shoulders. After the last Great War, after humanity had nearly destroyed itself and taken half the galaxy with them, they had made a choice. They retreated to the edge of everything. They built their civilization in secret. They let the universe forget they existed, but the universe was remembering now. "Make contact," she finally said. "Carefully. We need to know why they are here and what they want." Daniel turned to the communications officer and gave the order. A message was sent, traveling across the void to the small alien ship that had stumbled into humanity's secret home on the Eternal Seeker. Captain Orldon nearly fell from his chair when the transmission arrived. The message was in perfect High Vorthani, a language that should have been unknown outside Confederacy space. The voice was calm and friendly, which somehow made it more frightening. "Vessel Eternal Seeker, you have entered restricted territory. State your intentions and prepare to be escorted to a designated contact zone. Any hostile action will result in immediate neutralization. We hope that will not be necessary." Talveen looked at her captain with wide eyes. "They know our language. They know our ship's name. How is this possible?" Orldon had no answer. He only knew that everything his people believed about the galaxy had just been proven wrong. There was something out here, something powerful and ancient, and completely unknown. And they had just knocked on its door. Captain Orldon stood on the bridge of the Eternal Seeker, trying to decide what to do. His crew looked at him with fear in their eyes, waiting for orders. But what orders could he give? They were surrounded by ships they did not recognize, in a region of space that was supposed to be empty. Facing a species that should not exist, the message had been clear. They were to follow the escort vessels to a designated contact zone. Any resistance would be met with force. Orldon was a military officer with 30 years of experience, and he knew when he was outmatched. He gave the order to comply. The escort ships were sleek and fast, moving with a grace that made Vorthani vessels look clumsy by comparison. They led the Eternal Seeker through a maze of space stations and defensive platforms, each one bristling with weapons that Orldon's sensors could not identify. Whatever species lived here, they'd been preparing for war for a very long time. Navigator Talveen could not stop staring at her displays. The amount of infrastructure around them was staggering. She counted at least 50 major stations, hundreds of smaller outposts, and thousands of ships ranging from small patrol craft to massive warships that dwarfed anything in the Confederacy fleet. This was not a small colony hiding at the edge of space. This was a full civilization, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. "How did we not know about this?" she whispered. "How did no one ever find them?" Orldon shook his head. He had been asking himself the same question. The Confederacy had mapped every star system in the galaxy. They had sent probes to every corner of known space. Yet somehow, this entire civilization had remained invisible. It was as if they had wanted to be forgotten. The contact zone turned out to be a massive station in orbit around a gas giant. The station was beautiful in a strange way, all smooth curves and glowing lights. Nothing like the angular military designs the Vorthane favored. A docking port opened as they approached, and Orldin guided his ship inside. Commander Daniel Hayes was waiting for them in the docking bay, along with a small team of security off. Isurus, he watched the alien vessel settle onto the landing pad, studying its design with professional interest. The Vorthani built their ships for war, all armor and weapons with little concern for comfort. It said a lot about their culture. The airlock opened, and Captain Orldin stepped out. He was taller than Daniel had expected, his green scales catching the light as he moved. His eyes were multiple and compound, giving him an insect-like appearance that might have been unsettling to someone less experienced. Daniel simply nodded in greeting. "Welcome to Station Omega 7, he said in perfect Vorthani. "I am Commander Daniel Hayes. I will be your liaison during your stay here." Orldin's scales rippled with surprise. "You speak our language. Speak many languages. Please, follow me. There is much to discuss." The meeting took place in a conference room designed for exactly this purpose. The walls were neutral gray, the furniture simple and functional. There were no decorations, nothing that might give away information about human culture or history. Daniel sat across from Orldin and his senior officers. A small translation device humming on the table between them, even though it was not needed. "You have questions," Daniel said. "Ask them." Orldin leaned forward, his clawed hands resting on the table. "Who are you? What species is this?" "Our records show nothing. No one in the Confederacy has ever heard of your kind. We call ourselves humans," Daniel replied calmly. "And your records do contain information about us, though it has been buried very deep. Tell me, Captain, what do your oldest texts say about the Great Silence? About the war that ended all wars, 8,000 years ago?" The question hit Orldin like a physical blow. Every child in the Confederacy knew the story of the Great Silence, though most considered it myth rather than history. Long ago, there had been another civilization, one that ruled the entire galaxy. They had built wonders beyond imagination and weapons beyond comprehension. Then they had gone to war, not with other species, but with themselves. The war lasted less than a century, but when it ended, the great civilization was gone. Only ruins remained, scattered across the galaxy like tombstones. "The precursors," Orldin said slowly. "You are speaking of the precursors." Daniel shook his head. "No, we are not the precursors. We are what came after them. We are what survived when they tried to destroy everything. And we are what has been standing guard at the edge of the galaxy ever since, making sure they never come back." Navigator Talveen could not contain herself. "That is impossible. The precursors destroyed themselves. Everyone knows this." "The precursors were defeated," Daniel corrected her. "There is a difference. They pushed too far, created weapons they could not control. And in the end, those weapons were used against them, but not by each other." He paused, letting the words sink in. By us, the room fell silent. Orldin stared at the human commander, trying to process what he was hearing. If this was true, if even part of it was true, then everything the Confederacy believed about galactic history was wrong. Humanity had not just survived the Precursor War, they had won it. In the observation deck, above the conference room. Admiral Patricia Cole watched the meeting through a one-way window. Intelligence Director Samuel Grant stood beside her, his weathered face showing the concern he felt. "They will not believe him," Samuel said quietly. "It is too much to accept." "They do not need to believe him yet," Patricia replied. "They only need to listen. The believing will come later when they see what we can do. If they react badly, if they return to the Confederacy and tell them we are a threat." Patricia turned to look at her old friend. They had served together for over 40 years, through crises that the rest of the galaxy never knew about. She trusted his judgment more than anyone else alive. "Then we will have to convince them otherwise. One way or another." Back in the conference room, Daniel was continuing his explanation. He told Orldin about the Precursor War, about the weapons that had been used, about the devastation that had swept across the galaxy like a plague. He told him about humanity's choice to retreat, to hide, to let the younger species develop without interference. "We have been watching you for 3,000 years, Daniel said. We have seen your wars, your alliances, your struggles. We have chosen not to interfere because you deserve the chance to grow on your own terms. But we have also been waiting. Waiting for what?" Orldin asked. "For you to find us? Or for something worse to find you first?"
Us.
Daniel's expression grew serious. "The precursors are gone, but their legacy remains. There are weapons hidden throughout the galaxy. Terrible weapons that could destroy entire species if they fell into the wrong hands. We have spent 8,000 years trying to find them all. We have not succeeded." Orldin felt a chill run down his spine. "You are saying there are planet-killing weapons just waiting to be discovered?" "Star-killing weapons," Daniel corrected. "And worse. The precursors were very creative in their final days. They built things that should never have existed, and some of those things are still out there, waiting." The captain of the Eternal Seeker sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had come here expecting to find primitive aliens or empty space. Instead, he had found humanity, the hidden guardians of a galaxy that did not know it needed protection. Everything he thought he knew had been wrong. What happens now? He finally asked. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now, Captain, you have a choice to make. You can return to the Confederacy and tell them what you have learned. Or you can help us prepare for what is coming. Because something is coming. We have seen the signs, and when it arrives, the galaxy will need to stand together." Orldin looked at his crew, then back at the human commander. For the first time in his career, he had no idea what to do. 3 weeks passed on Station Omega-7. Captain Orldin and his crew remained as guests, though they understood they were also prisoners in a sense. The humans were polite but careful, never revealing more than they wanted to reveal. Always watching and measuring. Orldin spent most of his time with Commander Daniel Hayes, learning things that made his scales turn pale. The humans showed him records, images, data files that stretched back 8,000 years. They showed him the truth about the Precursor War. It was far worse than any legend had suggested. The precursors had been brilliant. They had mastered technologies that even now seemed like magic. They could fold space, travel between stars in moments, create matter from pure energy. But their greatest achievement had also been their greatest curse. They had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself, bending reality to their will. When the war began, they used everything they had. Stars were collapsed into black holes. Planets were torn apart atom by atom. Entire species were erased from existence, their very genetic code destroyed so completely that nothing remained. It was not just a war. It was the end of everything. "How did you survive?" Orldin asked one evening, sitting in the observation deck and watching distant stars. If the precursors had such power, how could any species stand against them? Daniel sat beside him, his human face difficult to read. "We were nothing when the war started. A young species on a small planet barely capable of reaching our own moon. The precursors did not consider us a threat. That was their mistake. But you defeated them." "We survived them," Daniel corrected. "There is a difference. When the precursors turned their weapons on each other, we hid. We watched. We learned. And when they had weakened themselves enough, we struck. Not with strength, because we had none. With cleverness, with patience, with weapons we stole from their own vaults." He pulled up a holographic display showing an image that made Orldin's blood run cold. It was a device, small and simple looking, floating in space. But the data readings beside it showed energy levels that should have been impossible. "This is the cascade generator," Daniel said quietly. "The weapon that ended the Precursor War. It creates a chain reaction in a star's core, causing it to collapse and then explode. One device, one star. Simple and terrible." Orldin stared at the image. "You still have this weapon?" "We have many weapons. All of them locked away, never to be used unless there is no other choice. That is the burden we carry, Captain. We inherited the most dangerous technology in the galaxy, and we chose to hide it rather than use it." Meanwhile, In the communications center of Station Omega 7, Admiral Patricia Cole was dealing with a different problem. The Galactic Confederacy had noticed that the Eternal Seeker had not returned. They were asking questions, demanding answers. Some species were calling for a military response. Intelligence Director Samuel Grant handed her the latest report. The Vorthani Military Council is pushing for an invasion. They want to send a fleet to recover their ship and crew. Patricia read the report with a frown. How large a fleet? 50 capital ships, 200 support vessels. Everything they have available in this sector? That would not be enough, Patricia said flatly. Not even close. I know, but they do not. They think they are dealing with a small colony of primitives who got lucky. They have no idea what they would be walking into. Patricia set down the report and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the vast network of defensive stations that surrounded human space. Each station was armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. And behind those stations, hidden in the depths of human territory, were things far worse. We need to prevent this, she said. A war would be disastrous for everyone, agreed. But how? The Confederacy does not trust us. They have no reason to. Patricia thought for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change everything. Invite them here. Not just the Vorthani, but all of them. Representatives from every major species. Let them see what we are. Let them understand what is at stake. Samuel looked uncertain. That is a significant risk. If they see our capabilities, they might become even more afraid. Fear can be useful, Patricia replied, but so can hope. We will show them both and let them choose which one to embrace. The invitation went out the next day. It's transmitted on frequencies that the Confederacy used for official diplomatic communications. The message was simple and direct. Humanity invited representatives from all member species to visit their territory and establish formal relations. No threats were made, no demands issued. Just an open hand extended across 8,000 years of silence. The response was mixed. Some species wanted nothing to do with the mysterious newcomers. Others were curious, eager to learn more about a civilization that had remained hidden for so long. The Vorthani Military Council still wanted war, but Ambassador Kethrel convinced them to wait. He remembered Captain Orldon, remembered the strange report the Eternal Seeker had sent before going silent. Something was happening out there, something important. In the end, a delegation was assembled. 12 species sent representatives, including the Vorthani, the crystalline Melshari, and the ancient Tolvan, who remembered fragments of the old stories. They traveled to the edge of the galactic map, following coordinates that had been marked. Forbidden for 8,000 years. What they found amazed them. The human territory was vast, far larger than anyone had expected. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of stations, millions of ships. It was not a colony hiding in the darkness. It was an empire, silent and watchful, that had been building its strength for longer than most Confederacy species had existed. Commander. Daniel Hayes met the delegation at Station Omega 7, where Captain Orldon was waiting. The Vorthani officer looked different now, his aggressive confidence replaced by something more thoughtful. He had learned things during his time with the humans, things that had changed how he saw the universe. Welcome, Daniel said to the assembled delegates. We have much to discuss. Meetings began immediately. The delegates asked questions, demanded explanations, challenged everything the humans told them. Daniel answered patiently, providing evidence when he could, admitting uncertainty when he could not. He did not try to convince them of anything. He simply presented the truth and let them draw their own conclusions. Admiral Patricia Cole joined the discussions on the third day. She was the highest-ranking human most of the delegates had ever seen, and her presence added weight to everything that was said. She spoke about the precursor war, about the choice humanity had made to hide, about the weapons they had inherited and the responsibility that came with them. We do not want to rule the galaxy, she told the delegates. We have had 8,000 years to conquer, if that was our goal. Instead, we chose to protect, to watch, to wait. Now we are asking you to join us, not as subjects, but as partners. High Arbiter Melancel, the ancient crystalline being who led the Melshari delegation, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What are you protecting us from? The precursors are gone. Patricia nodded slowly. The precursors are gone, but their weapons remain. And there are other things in the galaxy, things that have been sleeping for a very long time. We have detected movements in the deep reaches, signals that we have not seen in thousands of years. Something is waking up, High Arbiter. We do not know what it is, but we know it is coming. The delegates looked at each other with concern. This was not what they had expected. They had come to evaluate a potential threat or ally. Instead, they were being warned about something far worse. What do you need from us? Ambassador Kethril asked. Trust, Patricia replied. Cooperation. Time to prepare. The Confederacy has resources we need, knowledge we lack. Together, we might be able to face whatever's coming. Divided, we will certainly fail. It was a heavy message delivered without drama or exaggeration. The delegates understood that they were not being manipulated. The humans believed what they were saying. And that, more than anything else, made them willing to listen. The delegation spent 2 months in human territory. They visited stations and planets, met with scientists and soldiers, studied technology that made their own achievements look like children's toys. With each passing day, their understanding of humanity grew, and so did their fear. Ambassador Kethril walked through a museum on the human homeworld, a blue and green planet called Earth that looked impossibly fragile given what its inhabitants had accomplished. The museum was dedicated to the Precursor War, and every display made his scales turn pale. There were weapons here, inactive, but still terrifying. A device the size of his fist that could create a black hole. A crystal matrix that could erase memories from an entire planet. A biological agent that could rewrite genetic code, turning any species into something else entirely. The humans had captured these weapons, studied them, and locked them away. But they had not destroyed them. Why keep these things? Kethril asked Daniel Hayes, who had become his guide, and in a strange way his friend. Why not destroy them and be done with it? Daniel considered the question carefully. Because we might need them someday. Not to conquer, not to threaten, but to defend. The precursors are gone, but they were not the only danger in the universe. There are things out there that even they feared. What things? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he led Kethril to a restricted section of the museum, one that required special clearance to enter. Inside was a single display, showing images and data from human deep space probes. 30,000 years ago, before the precursors even existed, there was another civilization. We call them the architects because they built things on a scale that makes even the precursors seem small. They constructed artificial worlds, moved stars, created life itself. Then they vanished, leaving behind only their creations. Kethril studied the images. They showed structures that defied comprehension, rings around entire solar systems, spheres that enclosed stars, machines that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. What happened to them? We do not know, Daniel admitted, but their creations are still out there. Most of them are dormant, sleeping in the darkness between stars. A few have woken up over the millennia. The precursors fought some of them. We have fought others. Each time, the cost was enormous. And you believe more are waking up now? Daniel nodded grimly. Our sensors have detected activity in regions that have been silent for 10,000 years. Something is stirring. We do not know what it is or what it wants, but we know it is coming. And when it arrives, we will need every ally we can find. The revelation shook Kethril to his core. He had spent his entire career believing that the Vorthani Empire was one of the great powers in the galaxy. Now he understood that his people were nothing more than children, playing with toys while ancient gods slept in the darkness. High Arbiter. Lancel had her own revelation during a meeting with Admiral Patricia Cole. The two leaders sat in a private chamber, speaking honestly in a way that diplomats rarely did. Your people could have ruled the galaxy, Melancel said. With the technology you possess, no one could have stopped you. Why did you choose to hide instead? Patricia smiled sadly, because we remembered what happened when the precursors chose to rule. They were brilliant, powerful, and completely certain of their own superiority. That certainty destroyed them. We saw what pride could do, and we chose a different path. Some would call that cowardice. Some would be wrong. Patricia leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. It takes more courage to step back than to push forward. We could have built an empire, yes. We could have conquered every species in the galaxy and called ourselves masters of the universe. But what would that have accomplished? More war, more death, more destruction. We had seen enough of that. Alonso was silent for a long moment, her crystalline body flickering within her light. My people have fragments of memory from the time before the Confederacy. Stories passed down through generations, half remembered and mostly forgotten. They speak of a great darkness, a time when the stars themselves died. We thought it was myth, it was history, Patricia said quietly. And it could happen again if we are not careful. Meanwhile, Captain Orldon was having his own experience. He had been invited to observe a training exercise, a simulation of what human forces could do if they were ever called to fight. What he saw terrified him. Human ships moved with precision that seemed impossible. They appeared and disappeared, jumping through space in ways that violated everything Orldon knew about physics. Their weapons punched through shields like they were not there, destroying targets with surgical accuracy. And this was just a training exercise performed by regular crews using standard equipment. How? He asked the human officer beside him. A young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. How are your ships so fast? Sarah smiled, but there was no arrogance in it. We have had 8,000 years to improve. Our technology is based on precursor designs, refined and enhanced over countless generations. We do not fight fair, Captain. We cannot afford to. If you are this powerful, why do you need us? Why does the Confederacy matter to you? Sarah's smile faded. Because power is not everything. We have weapons that can destroy planets, ships that can cross the galaxy in days. Technology that your people will not develop for another 1,000 years. But we are alone. There are only 12 billion of us, scattered across a few hundred worlds. The Confederacy has trillions of citizens, thousands of planets, resources we could never match. She turned to face him directly. When the threat comes, and it will come, we cannot fight it alone. We need numbers, industry, the combined strength of every species in the galaxy working together. That is why the Confederacy matters. That is why we are reaching out after 8,000 years of silence. Orldon thought about everything he had seen and heard. The weapons, the ships, the ancient enemies stirring in the darkness. He thought about his own people, the Vorthani, so proud of their military strength that they could not imagine anyone being stronger. They had no idea what was out there. They will not believe me, he said quietly. When I return to the Confederacy, when I tell them what I have seen, they will think I have gone mad. Perhaps, Sarah agreed, but you will tell them anyway, and some of them will listen. That is all we can ask for. The delegation's final meeting was held in the Great Council Chamber of Station Omega-7. With representatives from all 12 species gathered around a massive table, Admiral Patricia Cole stood at the head, her presence commanding without being threatening. You have seen our capabilities, she said. You have heard our warnings. Now you must decide what to do with this knowledge. You can return to the Confederacy and call us liars. You can recommend war against us, though. I promise you that war would not end well for anyone. Or you can choose to believe what we have shown you and help us prepare for what is coming. Ambassador Kethrel spoke first. The Vorthani Council will be difficult to convince. They see strength and want to challenge it. That is our nature. Then show them what happens when strength meets greater strength, Patricia replied. We do not want conflict with your people, but we will not allow the Confederacy to destroy itself through ignorance. If the Vorthani push too hard, they will learn lessons that cannot be unlearned. High Arbiter Melancel rose from her seat, her crystalline form glowing brighter than before. I will speak to the Grand Council. I will tell them what I have seen and what I believe. I cannot promise they will listen, but I will make them hear. One by one, the other delegates offered similar commitments. They would return to their peoples and share what they had learned. They would advocate for cooperation rather than conflict. They would try to prepare the galaxy for a threat that most citizens did not know existed. It was not a perfect solution. It was not even a good one. But it was a beginning, and after 8,000 years of silence, a beginning was all humanity could ask for. The Grand Council of the Galactic Confederacy met in emergency session for the first time in 300 years. Representatives from over 200 species filled the vast chamber, their voices creating a noise like thunder as they debated the most important question in galactic history. Ambassador Cathrell stood at the center of the chamber, his green scales gleaming under the lights. Behind him, holographic displays showed images and data from his time in human territory. The evidence was overwhelming, but many delegates refused to accept it. "This is a deception," shouted General Trakemel of the Vorthane Military Council. "These so-called humans have fooled you with tricks and lies. They are not ancient guardians. They are invaders, preparing to conquer us while we waste time talking." "Then explain the weapons," Cathrell replied calmly. "Explain the technology. Explain how they knew our language, our ship's name, our patrol routes. They have been watching us for thousands of years, General. If they wanted to conquer us, they would have done it long ago." The debate raged for hours. Some species wanted immediate military action against humanity. Others called for caution and further investigation. A few, particularly the older species, whose records contained hints of the ancient past, urged acceptance of humanity's offer. High Arbiter Melancel waited until the noise died down before speaking. Her crystalline voice carried across the chamber like music, commanding attention without raising volume. "I have lived for 700 years, she said. "I have served on this council for 4 centuries. In all that time, I have never seen anything that shook my understanding of the universe as much as what I witnessed in human space." She moved to the center of the chamber, her body refracting the lights into rainbows that danced across the walls. "Our ancestors left warnings about the edge of the galaxy. We ignored those warnings because we thought we knew better. We thought we were the masters of the universe, the greatest civilization that had ever existed. We were wrong." The chamber fell silent. When Melancel spoke, people listened. "The humans are not our enemies. They could be. With the technology they possess, they could destroy every fleet we have, burn every world we inhabit, erase our very existence from the galaxy. Instead, they chose to hide. They chose to watch. They chose to wait until we were ready to hear the truth." General Trakemel interrupted angrily. "And what truth is that? That we should bow to these mysterious saviors and accept whatever they tell us?" "The truth," Melancel replied coolly, "is that we are not alone. We have never been alone. There are forces in this galaxy that we cannot comprehend, dangers that we cannot face by ourselves. The humans understand this because they have faced those dangers before. They are offering to share that understanding with us, to help us prepare for threats we do not even know exist." She turned to address the entire council. "We stand at a crossroads. We can treat humanity as a threat to be destroyed, and in doing so, invite the very destruction they have worked so hard to prevent. Or we can accept their offer, learn from their experience, and build something new together." The vote took place the following day. It was close, closer than Melancel had hoped. But in the end, the council chose hope over fear. The quarantine was lifted. Humanity was recognized as a legitimate power, to be treated with respect rather than hostility. Admiral Patricia Cole received the news on Station Omega 7. Standing in the observation deck where so many important conversations had taken place, Commander Daniel Hayes stood beside her, watching the stars with an expression of cautious optimism. "They accepted," he said quietly. "After 8,000 years, they actually accepted." Patricia nodded, but her expression remained guarded. "Acceptance is just the beginning. Trust will take much longer to build, and we still do not know what is waking up in the deep regions." "No," Daniel agreed. "But at least now we will not have to face it alone." The first joint operations began within months. Human ships worked alongside Confederacy vessels, sharing technology and training techniques. Scientists from dozens of species collaborated on research projects that would have been impossible before. Slowly, Carefully, the galaxy began to change. Captain Orldon returned to his homeworld a different person than when he had left. He had seen things that most Vorsani could not imagine, learned truths that challenged everything his people believed. Some called him a traitor for advocating cooperation with the humans. Others called him a visionary for recognizing the threat they all faced. He did not care what they called him. He only knew that the universe was bigger and more dangerous than anyone had realized, and that survival would require working together in ways they had never tried before. On Earth, the human homeworld celebrations were muted. Patricia Cole addressed her people in a broadcast that reached every human settlement in the galaxy. For 8,000 years, we have carried a burden that no other species could share. We have guarded the darkness, watched for threats, prepared for wars that we hoped would never come. Today that burden becomes lighter. Not because the threats have disappeared, but because we no longer face them alone. She paused, looking directly into the camera. The galaxy is waking up. Ancient machines are stirring in the deep regions. Signals are being transmitted that we have not heard in millennia. We do not know what is coming, but we know it is coming. And for the first time in our history, we have allies who will stand with us when it arrives. The broadcast ended, but the work was just beginning. Across human space, preparations intensified. Ships were upgraded, weapons tested, defenses strengthened. The humans had spent 8,000 years getting ready for this moment. Now they would find out if it was enough. Daniel Hayes stood on the observation deck of Station Omega 7. Watching the first joint fleet exercises between human and Confederacy forces, ships from a dozen species maneuvered together, learning to coordinate in ways they had never attempted before. It was clumsy and awkward, but it was also beautiful in its own way. Ambassador Kethril stood beside him, watching with a mixture of wonder and concern. The Vorsani had always believed in strength through dominance. This new approach, strength through cooperation, was difficult for his people to accept. But they were trying. "Do you think it will work?" Kethril asked. "Do you think we can truly learn to fight together?" Daniel considered the question carefully. He thought about the 8,000 years his people had spent in isolation, watching the galaxy develop without interference. He thought about the ancient weapons locked away in vaults, the terrible knowledge they carried, the responsibility that came with being the inheritors of the precursor legacy. "I do not know," he admitted honestly. "We have never tried this before. We have always stood alone, facing threats by ourselves, keeping secrets that could destroy civilizations. This is new for us too." Kethril nodded slowly. "My people are not good at trust. We see strength and want to test it. That is our nature. And our nature is caution," Daniel replied. "We have seen what happens when powerful species act without thinking. We learned that lesson 8,000 years ago, and we have never forgotten it. Then perhaps we can learn from each other." Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown in longer than he could remember. "Perhaps we can." The stars stretched out before them, vast and unknowable. Somewhere in that darkness, something was waking up. Something ancient and powerful. Something that had been sleeping since before the precursors existed. When it fully awakened, when it turned its attention to the galaxy's current inhabitants, everything would change. But for the first time in 8,000 years, humanity would not face that change alone. They had allies now, partners who understood the stakes and were willing to fight for survival. It was not much, but it was more than they had ever had before, and sometimes Daniel thought, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for whatever was coming. In the silence between stars, ancient machines began to move. Following programs written before life existed on most inhabited worlds, the architects had left behind more than just structures. They had left behind a purpose, one that was finally being fulfilled. But humanity was ready. They had been ready for 8,000 years. And now, with the Confederacy standing beside them, they would face the future together, whatever it might bring.